Before the world had laws, courts, prisons, or police, people still had to decide what to do with criminals. If someone committed murder, their fate was decided not by the men in robes, but by the family of the deceased. And what they did was truly brutal. This is something they never teach you in your typical history class at school. Our modern justice system didn't begin with fairness, honest trials, or humane fines. It began with pure, personal, and unfettered vengeance. And for most of human history, this was considered perfectly normal.
Let's go back to a time when laws didn't exist at all. Imagine a small, primitive tribe of only about 30 people. All around you is wilderness, and you have no police to call for help, no courts to complain to. And then one day, someone steals all your food. Or even worse, someone kills your closest brother. What happens next? You don't expect outside help. You take matters into your own hands. You and your family deal with the offender on your own. Scientists call this system self-help, or do-it-yourself justice. But behind this soft and polite scientific name lies a true nightmare. Lynch justice in the ancient world almost always degenerated into endless blood feuds that literally wiped out entire family dynasties and clans. One murder inevitably led to a retaliatory murder. Then the other side took revenge, and this cycle of violence never stopped.
And here lies the main paradox, which few people consider. Revenge, originally created to restore justice and punish the perpetrator, in fact, simply created more and more victims. Ancient punishment knew no boundaries or limits. In those days, people considered it perfectly normal and acceptable to kill a man simply for stealing a goat from a neighbor. Death for a goat? And no one around even argued, since revenge knew no bounds. But in small ancient communities, there was a punishment considered even worse than instant death.
Consider this for a second. The most terrible sentence for a person was exile. If a tribe expelled you from its group, it meant only one thing: a slow and painful death, completely alone in the wilderness, without a warm shelter, without food, and, most importantly, without any protection from wild predators. The wilderness killed the exiled person slowly and painfully. And the most horrifying thing is that the criminal's former tribesmen didn't even have to stain their hands with blood or carry out the execution themselves. All they had to do was stop protecting you. They simply turned away, closed the door in your face, and went to the fire, letting the wilderness finish the dirty work for them.
And here's where school textbooks lie again, carefully omitting important details. We're often taught that ancient people were completely wild, chaotic, living in utter chaos and obeying only the law of the jungle. But this idea is fundamentally wrong. Each ancient group, even the most primitive, always had its own clear rules. In fact, every human community, without exception, had its own internal laws. Anthropologists have studied hundreds of different tribes of gallery hunters on every continent, and it turns out that each of them had ironclad, universally understood rules regarding theft, intragroup violence, and betrayal.
And breaking these codes always met with harsh consequences. It's just that these rules were completely different from our modern laws. There's one thing that should truly astound you. The instrument of punishment, public shaming, is far older than any law written on paper or carved in stone. It predates them. In the days before stone prisons, a person's reputation was their only ticket to life. If you lost your reputation, you automatically lost everything. No one wanted to trade with you or share resources with you. You couldn't find a mate. You had no allies in the event of a real fight with a neighboring tribe. And most importantly, you no longer had a place at the communal fire.
Ancient communities used public censure and shame with surgical precision. A criminal was never punished in secret or behind closed doors. He was demonstratively,
harshly and in full view of everyone he knew, in front of all the people who mattered to him and on whom his survival directly depended. Few people talk about this aspect of ancient justice these days, but the system worked flawlessly. And it worked because we humans are biologically programmed to be desperately concerned about what others think of us. This internal programming of our brains has been developing for millions of years. It runs much deeper than any rational mind and frightens us more than the fear of ordinary physical pain. It was precisely this panicky fear of social rejection that kept ancient communities from disintegrating and kept them functioning as a single organism long before the first king thought of carving the first law in stone. Incidentally, your brain is still running on this same ancient software right now. Every time you commit a stupid act and feel your face flush with shame in front of strangers, know that an ancient alarm system, over 2 million years old, has been triggered within you. Ancient justice was well aware of this vulnerability and skillfully pressed the right buttons. But a system built on shame had one huge and fatal flaw. It worked perfectly only as long as groups remained small. As soon as human settlements began to expand and develop into large cities, shame instantly lost its former power. Why? Because now you could simply screw up in one place, pack up, move to the next big city, and start over. There, you had a new face, a new name, and a completely clean reputation, because no one knew you. The ancient system of shame vitally required that everyone in the community know everyone else by sight. So as cities grew, people had to invent something fundamentally new, something that would follow you wherever you decided to run. Something that couldn't be gotten rid of by simply moving to the next village. And then what we today call a permanent dossier, or criminal record, entered the arena of history. The ancient Sumerians, around 3,000 years BC, began recording all legal transactions and offenses on clay tablets. They recorded not just general rules, but specific cases, people's names, their personal crimes, and the precise punishments meted out for them. All of this was meticulously recorded and stored in archives. Your offense no longer disappeared or was forgotten after the last witnesses to your theft died. It lived on in the baked clay forever, and this point should never be underestimated. These Sumerian clay tablets are the direct ancestors of your modern criminal record. The inhabitants of ancient Sumer invented a fully functional paper trail 4,000 years before humans even invented paper. And they did so for exactly the same reason modern governments do today: to ensure that no one could escape their past by simply disappearing into the crowds of another city. When clay tablets recorded the first crimes, humanity took a step forward. But cities continued to grow rapidly, and simple revenge could no longer keep thousands from wreaking havoc. Something had to be invented that would make everyone tremble. And then the rulers of the ancient world came up with a brilliant solution. They handed over the power to judge and punish to the gods. If you think ancient courts were like modern ones, where lawyers and prosecutors argue based on evidence, you're sorely mistaken. In Babylon and other ancient kingdoms, no one looked for evidence. Instead, defendants were sent to what was known as divine judgment, or ordeals. These were horrific physical trials that today seem utterly insane to us. The most popular method was ordeal by water. If a person was accused of witchcraft or a serious crime, they were bound and thrown into the sacred Euphrates River. The logic of the ancient judges was strikingly simple. If the river accepted the person, meaning they drowned, it meant the gods saw their guilt and punished them. If the person miraculously managed to swim to the surface without drowning, their hands tied, they were declared completely innocent, and their accuser was immediately executed for false accusation. Elsewhere on the planet, defendants were forced to hold red-hot irons or plunge their hands into boiling oil. It was believed that if the wounds healed without inflammation after a few days, then higher powers had personally confirmed the person's innocence.
In reality, this macabre theater had one simple goal: to relieve the judges of the psychological burden of responsibility. No one wanted to take the blame for executing a neighbor, so all decisions were attributed to the will of the gods. But a real revolution in the history of justice occurred about 3,800 years ago, when the famous Babylonian king Hammurabi came to power. He ordered the world's first comprehensive code of laws to be carved on a huge black stone pillar. And its main rule, which everyone had heard, was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Today, we think of the law of Talion as the pinnacle of primitive cruelty. But in fact, for its time, it was an incredible leap forward in humanity. Before Hammurabi, if you gouged out an eye in a fight, the offended family could come at night and completely exterminate your entire family. King Hammurabi was the first in history to introduce strict limits on revenge. The laws literally told people, if someone gouges out your eye, you have the right to take only the eye and nothing more. For the first time, the state took away people's right to unlimited personal vengeance and took the monopoly on violence for itself.
However, history books often gloss over the most fundamental and cynical truth of Hammurabi's laws. This stone pillar didn't even hint at human equality. Justice in Babylon depended solely on your social status and your wallet. Laws clearly divided people into three categories: the highest nobility, free citizens, and slaves. If a nobleman gouged out the eye of another nobleman, he would also have his own eye gouged out as punishment. But if the same rich man gouged out the eye of an ordinary poor person or someone else's slave, no one touched his face. He simply paid a small fine to the royal treasury.
Hammurabi's code didn't defend justice. It protected the established order and the rights of those in power. Centuries later, humanity devised another model that formed the basis of our world: the jury trial. This happened in ancient Athens. The Greeks were the first to decide that a person's fate should be decided not by kings, gods, or professional judges, but by ordinary citizens. An Athenian trial was a massive spectacle. 500, sometimes even more than 1,000 jurors could participate simultaneously. There were no prosecutors. The accuser and the accused had to personally address the huge crowd and compete in oratory. But this beautiful democratic system turned out to be an incredibly dangerous trap. A jury trial in Athens often degenerated into a contest of emotions, envy, and cheap populism. The most notorious disgrace of this system was the trial of the great philosopher Socrates in 399 BC. Socrates didn't commit theft, didn't cause riots, and didn't kill anyone. He simply walked the streets of the city and asked uncomfortable questions, forcing people to think and question the decisions of the authorities. He was accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. The fate of the greatest thinker was decided by 501 Athenian citizens. An ordinary crowd, swayed by emotion and fear, voted for the death sentence. Socrates was forced to drink poison. This case forever proved that when a trial turns into a mob vote, truth and justice are the first to perish. The Roman Empire put the finishing touches on the architecture of ancient law. The Romans created the most complex, sophisticated, and detailed legal system, elements of which lawyers still use today. They devised the presumption of innocence, the institution of professional lawyers, and clear interrogation procedures. But the Romans built this entire ingenious legal system on a single, ironclad, cynical foundation. The value of your life is directly dependent on your origins. If a Roman citizen committed a serious crime, the law prohibited torture during interrogation, and if sentenced to death, he was executed quickly and painlessly, by beheading. But if a provincial or a slave was accused of the same crime, he was subjected to the most exquisite tortures and then sent to a painful, public death on the cross, or to be devoured by wild beasts in the arena of the Colosseum for the public's amusement.
What is the result of this long and bloody journey? Our modern judicial system is not the final, perfect answer to the question of justice. It is simply the current stage in the evolution of human fear and power. And no matter how beautiful courtrooms, robed judges, and complex legal jargon may appear today, the same ancient question lurks beneath the surface. 3 million years ago, primitive man faced the family of his victim face to face around a campfire and understood justice as pure, instantaneous force. Today, the state has wrapped this force in complex procedures, laws, and codes so that judges' decisions appear to us as an inevitable law of nature, rather than the choice of specific individuals. But the main question hasn't changed in these thousands of years. Who exactly writes the rules of the game, and whose interests do these rules truly protect?